Welcome to Locking In on Security with Havoc Shield. Today's installment is called the Not-So-Rare Security Questionnaire. Growth companies selling to enterprises have long faced a barrage of procurement steps that are probably the least fun part of landing a big enterprise client. The way that companies navigate this process has a whole lot to do with how the proactive CTOs prepare their organization to answer the tough questions versus how other growth companies might treat the questions more reactively. Today, we're very pleased to be joined by Jason Shah, Chief Technology Officer of Mediafly. If you look at Mediafly's client list, it's obvious that Jason has navigated this vendor onboarding process numerous times. So we're delighted to have him here today to talk about the Not-So-Rare Security Questionnaire. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Phil. And I love the title of this episode. I think that speaks really well to the problems that we solve every day.
It's factual. They are not rare. So, I think it's a little bit clever. So Jason, take us back to a time before these enterprise security vetting processes involved hundreds of questions on a spreadsheet. How did we get from that world to a world where every enterprise sale involves a tap on your shoulder as CEO with a heavy Excel spreadsheet in hand, full of cybersecurity questions, and of course, all due tomorrow?
Yeah.
What trend triggered this shift towards these massive enterprise security questionnaires?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are two kind of major drivers of this shift. Number one is the transition from on-prem to cloud. And then the second one is around the rollout of SaaS and the ability for line managers to purchase. So with the transition from on-prem to cloud, you have a lot of CIOs who previously knew everything that was installed in the four walls of their building or across all their departments. They were shipped a CD, or previous to that, floppy drives full of software.
Sure.
They would go ahead and install it on their server farms and mainframes and other things that they had installed in their four walls, and they had full control over the entire firewall and everything within the firewall, right? So the traditional
that created a comfort, that sort of a comfort of, hey, the only things I need to manage are things that are physically inside of this office where I can walk around and see and feel and touch the equipment. That provided comfort. Okay. Yeah,
definitely right. I mean, if you think about the walls of your house, right? Like if you buy something that's not connected to the internet, right? Like this isn't going to be a great analogy.
What would that be now?
Yeah, I know, right? If you bought a computer back in the in the 90s or 80s and you brought it home, once it's inside of your house, then that's pretty much it. Like there's very little that could attack that computer.
Right.
Similarly with this software, you install the software inside. If you've got a tight lock on your external networks, there's very little that could affect that. So I think the questions that were asked of vendors at the time were limited in scope. And I think that's because the CIOs and the CISOs had full control of everything happening inside. Sure,
there was this feeling of that you lock all the doors of the house, as it were, and inside of the house, whatever you set in there has some degree of intrinsic safety because of the perimeter around it.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's why so many questions on these questionnaires ask about, what's your DMZ setup look like, right? I mean, in this day and age, if you talk to a lot of cloud native vendors like ourselves and, probably you guys, the concepts of DMZ aren't as strong as they used to be, right?
Right.
DMZ for us is a configuration of security groups. It's not necessarily, we have this layer of DMZ that things connect in and out of. It's not as strong of a concept anymore as it used to be.
So then the transition to cloud from kind of the old world to cloud, you think that's kind of one of the big triggers that caused enterprises to say, wait, we've got to ask a lot more of these vendors as we onboard them?
So that was one of the triggers. And I think the other trigger is the concurrent innovation of line managers being able to purchase their own software directly from SaaS vendors. And so, I mean, obviously with Salesforce kind of leading that charge or kind of being the biggest name in that industry, but tons of other vendors along those lines, the Mediafly included, right? The ability for line managers to come in and start purchasing software without undergoing like a full vetting on the IT side. CISO and CIO departments are all of a sudden like, hold up here, we got to put some controls around this, right? Because we don't know anything about what's going on over here. Meanwhile, this company is trying to come in and connect every calendar and email account and ingest everything on. We don't understand what they're doing with this data or how they're protecting it. So
and you think about all the different functions of a company. I mean, you've got your sales team, your marketing team, your operations team, your R&D team, your finance team, all these different teams that I think these days feel very comfortable going out and shopping for a SaaS platform that meets their business requirements.
Yeah.
And I could just imagine being in the seat of a CTO or a CISO dealing with kind of the wild west of all these different applications entering their ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, wild west is probably the right word, right? And I think over the past 5 years, it feels like we're seeing much more rigor, even in the medium-sized businesses, much more rigor around the questionnaires and the depth of the questions and levels of questions being asked. Whereas kind of previous to that, it truly was Wild West, right? You'd have some mid-size and even some large clients where they would ask you maybe like 30 questions, and you look at them and like, anyone could have answered yes to all of these, right? This is not a true security questionnaire.
Sure.
And then on the opposite spectrum, you'd have some clients. We had one media and entertainment studio come back to us with 2,000 questions on that questionnaire.
Ooh.
2,000.
That's the tap on the shoulder you don't want, Jason. That's
Totally. And the worst thing is the project got shelved after I finished that one.
Well, I don't fault these enterprises for being extremely careful about growth companies that are entering their supply chain or their partner ecosystem. I think it's wise for them to, and also for the growth businesses themselves, to be clear on who's responsible for what on the cybersecurity front, which party bears what responsibility, et cetera. That seems smart, but there's got to be an easier way, right? What can CTOs of growth companies do to make this, or what can CTOs of growth companies and their counterparts in the enterprise procurement teams do to make this process smoother than all the friction that we see in these questionnaires?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to the answer from what a CTO can do, having and currently living that. If you're a CTO of a growth stage company and you're coming in, you don't have a ton of budget, most likely, to go and hire, a CISO on your side to go and do this for you. So you're kind of responsible for it. The most likely scenario is you've probably maybe done this in a limited capacity or never done this before. I mean, the number one thing you need to do is be prepared. So think of it from the point of view of someone buying the software. Usually the person who's giving you the security questionnaire is not going to be the CISO or that department. It might be some guy in IT or girl in IT. It might be even the kind of the person championing the purchase of this software, being told that they have to go get this out. And think of all the reviews that they have to do. I mean, some of these companies probably have to review hundreds of these a year. So the best thing you can do is be prepared. And when I say that, I mean, have your content well-structured, well-ready to go, include, broken out across information security, physical security, if, once we get back into the offices, that will matter again.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. Engineering practices, secure privacy policies. There's a handful of other kind of broad spectrum ideas in there. What you should do is write a document for each one of these, and ideally go look at kind of the, you might find samples online, or go look at, the ISO, SOC 2 or ISO 2701 categories, and then kind of structure your document around that. It doesn't have to be super fancy at the get-go, but it gives you something to build off of.
And you think by kind of popping out to that level and not sweating so much that this particular security questionnaire might be worded a little bit differently. You think popping out to that level where you think along the lines of these broad themes, that if you're organized along these broad themes that will come up in the questionnaires, that you're kind of well equipped to jump on it when you get the specific questions?
Definitely. So, I mean, if you look at the history of some of our questionnaires, so our most robust one is our information security questionnaire, and it makes the most sense that that's the most robust. One thing you should do, the person listening to this, well, not you specifically, Phil. One thing.
Although we're glad to help.
One thing the growth CTO should be doing is creating a change log of every time you make a change, because believe me, you're going to need that in the future. But if you go back and look back at the change log of every change that has been made to this document of ours, which today is about 15 pages long, you go look at the early versions of this, and it was really simple, right? We started simple, and as more questions came in, a question might have come in around, well, what are you doing around, your intrusion detection? Like, what policy do you have around that? Okay, let me go figure out how to answer that question, what we're doing around that. Maybe we go implement something, and then immediately go and add that into the security policy. So the next time the question comes up, it's ready to go. And so now, whenever our sales teams come in and ask, hey, I need to send over these policies, we generate a link out of our system, which is a content management and distribution system. So for us, it works really well. But if you're using Google Drive or Box or anything like that, you can certainly do the same thing. Generate a link out of it and put a password on it, and have your sales rep send that link and password off. And it has a list of all of your documents in there.
I have to think that when you're going through a vendor onboarding process and you receive an enterprise security questionnaire, and you quickly are able to respond back and say, yeah, here's the link. We have an intrusion detection system, and here's how it works and the scope of it and what we're doing to incorporate that into our systems. I have to think that shows incredibly well to everyone that's kind of eavesdropping on the process and saying, well, gee, this team at Mediafly, they look like they've really got it together. Yeah,
we've gotten compliments from the people evaluating these things before with the process we're using. So it means we're doing something right. From mid-sized and large companies saying, I appreciate how thorough and comprehensive these documents were, because it makes my job easier. And speaking of making your job easier, if you're able to do this, a lot of the questions on these questionnaires, you can answer with the answer of, please see information security policy or please see privacy policy.
That's great.
Right? Simplifies things dramatically when you're coming in to actually complete, 10 to 20 of these questionnaires a month.
I think that too is also confidence inducing, to be able to reply and to give a reply that signals, we've thought about this, we've already incorporated this into our policies. You're not the first person to ask about this, and we've got it covered. That feels like a very, very strong reply.
Yeah. It's worked out really well for us, and it saves just a ton of time, a ton of my time on doing this too.
So you've kind of gone through this in a very rigorous way, where now you've got kind of internal systems, policies, processes, and tools that prepare you for all manner of questions that come in. But as we think ahead to the future, isn't there a lower friction approach that enterprises could take that would give them the same comfort about your operations and your seriousness about cybersecurity, without putting you through these questionnaires? Is there? Can you give me a ray of hope for the future, for someone that's in the spot that Mediafly was maybe when you were first founded? Do they have a better and easier journey ahead than all the hard work you had to do to prepare for this type of vetting?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a magic answer, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, I guess. So there are audit standards like SOC 2, ISO 27001, which we talked about earlier. In theory, those will help. There are, in theory, we're undergoing some of those certifications right now in Mediafly, so I can't tell you whether, if I provided those questionnaires, would we have fewer questions to answer?
Sure.
Hopefully the answer is yes, but
right.
I have a pretty strong feeling that whoever's creating these questionnaires doesn't care what you give back to them. They're still going to ask you the same questions, because they're filling out their own spreadsheets and they just have to. So my guess is, yes, we're doing this, and we're doing it for specific customers that require it, but it will not reduce the burden of completing those questionnaires. Secondly, there are companies out there, and we've been reached out by a couple of them, that try to help automate the questionnaire responses. And the way they work is they'll work for free with the vendors, or maybe for a small fee with the vendors, to get the questionnaires into this workflow system. And then they'll let you fill out the questionnaires in their system, and then they'll use that as a lead gen tool to try and get you to pay to use their solution to submit that to other vendors. So they're trying to become this marketplace almost.
Sure.
The problem I have with that is, unless one of these companies has a significant market share, or unless like CIOs for large industries agree on a common data format, kind of like SCORM did for e-learning, or EDI is done for B2B data exchange, not one of these companies will have sufficient clout or persuasion to be able to truly live up to that hype that I as a vendor go fill this information in once, and then it just goes to get blasted out whenever I need to. So until I actually see that happen, I personally am not going to follow along on those companies.
Sure. And we're seeing just when you compare and contrast various enterprise security questionnaires that land on your desk, we're, on our end, we're seeing just a tremendous variety of the questions, the structure, everything. And it does not yet seem to be converging on any kind of standard format. I have hopes for a longer term future that perhaps that would be the case, but it doesn't seem like it's close yet.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a problem that's ripe for a machine learning solution. I mean, maybe some of the new, text generation stuff that's been coming out from OpenAI, maybe that's a good use of this. But essentially, it feels like if you are able to amass or assemble a data bank of answers and you feed that into the right solution, it should be able to help you answer these much quicker. Maybe that's a business opportunity for somebody else who's listening to this podcast to go after if they haven't already.
Or even Havoc Shield.
Or even Havoc Shield, yeah.
We're always kind of monitoring, because I think it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. There does need to be some friction reducing innovation in this space, because it's unnecessary overhead when you have a business decision maker that wants to engage a particular growth company, and both the growth company and the business decision maker are eager to get to that point of value creation where the solution is adopted. And the frictions in between are just begging to be optimized. So, here's hoping for a better future. Speaking of kind of the trends that we're seeing from these enterprises, what are they not asking you that they should be? What are some areas where you kind of look at your business and say, we've implemented additional safeguards and practices and tools related to cybersecurity in this particular area, and enterprises are not yet focusing on asking questions in that area? What are they failing to ask that they actually should be asking?
Yeah. Well, I'll start first with the opposite question, which is, what are they asking that they shouldn't be asking? And we get a lot of questions around physical security. So, kind of silly stuff like, are there guards who are searching your backpacks for visitors when they come in and leave? And are there cameras at every entrance? I mean, honestly, in today's working from home environment,
right.
And, I think we all believe that this working from home model is going to continue at much greater emphasis in the future.
Right.
That stuff doesn't matter as much anymore unless you're truly dealing with physical goods, and, physical IP or stuff.
There are a great number of offices right now where the only person that's been into it is the post office person to deliver mail, and the janitorial staff to clean
crew. That's right. So this whole concept of physical security, at least from the perspective of the office space, doesn't matter as much. But what does matter more now is the physical security of the home office, or at least the digital security of the home office, right? So, we've all set up at home. How are we engaging with our office, or our company's infrastructure from the home? And, most companies, at least that you and I are talking to, probably have a lot of this figured out. When you talk about small, medium businesses, or when you talk about companies maybe in manufacturing, where they're pre-pandemic, they were so much more focused on in-office, they may not have this concept of remote working down. So, concepts like allowing VPN access from home, or remote desktoping from home, right? Those sorts of concepts they may not have rolled out, and
sure,
clearly they can do them. And those models are not new. They just need to companies need to start asking about it in that direction with the
Right.
assumption that work from home is the default.
Right. Best practices around VPNs, around home router configuration, around mixed use networks at home where you've got IoT devices.
Yeah.
You've got tablets and laptops that are used for other non-work purposes. There are best practices surrounding this kind of reality, but I think there are many companies that don't yet know what questions to ask and are kind of struggling to find their way through that.
Yeah, and that's going to be a challenge too, right? Because solving for that is tough. And I know you guys are doing quite a bit along those lines. Certainly, I can imagine solving for like, how do I ensure that the security of maybe one of my salespeople who may not be very technology forward at home is in a well-protected environment?
Absolutely.
How am I ensuring that they're not connecting their IP camera directly to their network, which is then funneling all of their traffic back into a network in China, for instance? Not to pick on them, but
right.
Example of it.
I think you think about all the people in an organization that might be handling highly sensitive information. It can be as simple as someone who's got the ACH information for your company, or someone that is running payroll or handling an HR matter. It's not just the group of employees that are creating the intellectual property surrounding the company's product. It kind of spans all of these different functional areas, including employees that might have less of a passion for configuring their home router.
Yeah, definitely. And then it leads to kind of the thing that I think companies need to ask more about is, what kind of security training programs are you running? Are you doing spear phishing tests against your employees, right? I mean, spear phishing is showing and proving to be one of the most effective attack vectors across company employees.
We're seeing trends where spear phishing attackers are very quick to send attacks to newly onboarded employees.
Yeah.
So, monitoring data sources that are kind of readily available on the web to discern that this new employee just started at the company over the past week, and perhaps would be a good target to send an email supposedly from their CEO asking them to buy $10,000 of gift cards.
Right. Or the hey, are you available? I've got a quick question for you, like from the fake email address. Yeah,
right.
We see that a lot too.
Yep. Well, thank you, Jason. I think in so many ways, the Not-So-Rare Security Questionnaire is misunderstood. When growth companies treat it in a reactive way, it creates this huge amount of trouble and friction and scramble to implement satisfactory cybersecurity processes. But best-in-class companies like Mediafly have really succeeded at turning that dynamic on its head, getting proactively ready, getting the tools, the processes, the practices ready in a rigorous way, so that when that question lands, they are already fundamentally doing all the things that enterprise would expect to be in place. So even though the enterprise security questionnaire is still not any fun to complete, I think best-in-class companies have found a way to handle it proactively in a way that's very satisfying to the enterprise. So, Jason, thanks for joining us today to share your perspective on the Not-So-Rare Security Questionnaire, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, Phil. You too.